The series that I'm most excited for in the first round of the NBA playoffs this season seems like it's going to be the Utah Jazz and the Los Angeles Clippers, the 4-5 matchup in the West. We're going to talk about this series, and maybe we'll learn something in the end and I can pick who I think is going to win this thing. Let's start with the star players, or the guys who are the driving forces of these offenses. Chris Paul for the Los Angeles Clippers, and Gordon Hayward, or the White LeBron, on Reddit, for the Utah Jazz. Now, if we talk about CP3, probably still the most well-rounded point guard in the NBA today. He's just great in every area. You leave a guy open, he'll find him. You give him a seam in order to score himself, he can do it. Shooting 50% from mid-range, he might be the best in the NBA in that category. Gordon Hayward's creation ability has just increased tenfold, averaging over 20 points a game, efficient from everywhere. The ball is in his hands a frequent amount of the time. Not the best playmaker in the world, but he's making a lot of strides as a star player. And I think these two are going to have to show up for their teams as we expect. Because, it's a stars-driven league, and you can be coached well, you can have a very deep roster. The stars still have to align, if I can make a bad joke. Now, how are the teams going to deal with these two? Well, for Chris Paul, he's going to have to go through George Hill, who is one of the better defensive point guards in the NBA. Last season, one of the reasons why Kyle Lowry struggled so much in round one, it was because of George Hill. But, defending Chris Paul is a hell of a task, but he's the guy to do it. And then Gordon Hayward's going to be defended by Luke Richard and Mbah, I'm going to assume. Well-sized, small forward who can also play the power forward position as well. He's the ideal type of guy to defend Hayward. If he's going to be able to do it is a different question, but that's the first step, is the one-on-one defense against these two star players. But now let's dive into the Clippers a bit more. They have a heavy pick-and-roll offense, and we're going to focus on Blake Griffin here, as he would probably be the number 2 guy for their team, especially when it comes to offense. The Jazz, in my opinion, are going to have a tough time dealing with him with a lot of the power forwards on their roster, whether it's Trey Lyles, who's in his second season, and Boris Diaw, who has just declined as a player. I think he'll have a really tough time defending Blake in a pick and roll, and I think Griffin's going to have a lot of success against these two, and I think the Jazz are just going to have to look for potentially other options at their power forward position. Now, they do have one other guy, and that guy would, of course, be Derrick Favors. He's been injured all season. He's played around 50 games, I want to say, and even when he's been in, he has not been himself. If Derrick Favors is 100%, then this would be a hell of a matchup because he's a very good defensive player. He's strong as hell. I don't think Blake Griffin would have an easy time up against Favors at all. But unfortunately, that Derrick Favors just really hasn't been here for the entire season, so I don't know what we're going to get. If we're going to get the healthy one, then yes, I think the defense on Blake can be awesome, but if we don't get that one, then I think Blake could just go off against the Jazz in this series, and that might be too much to overcome for them. Especially if Favors isn't able to defend him, and then you have Lyles and Diaw and Joe Johnson at the small ball 4. It's just not ideal if Favors can't be himself, and I could also say a healthy Derrick Favors could give it to Blake Griffin on the post a bit as well. Not to say that he would dominate the matchup. I would still consider Blake Griffin to be the better player, but I think the difference between Favors and Griffin in a playoff series head-to-head, I don't think it's that drastically different. I expected Favors to make a big leap this season, and then like I mentioned, he had the injuries, so that matchup could be great, or it could just be very one-sided. Now, of course, Rudy Gobert being the best rim protector in the NBA, and very good chance he wins Defensive Player of the Year, you put him on Blake Griffin, okay, now we're having a different discussion, but at the same time, Rudy is, he's a fantastic defender from really everywhere, but ideally, you wouldn't want him defending Blake just because, Blake operates from the mid-range and that type of stuff. You want Gobert as close to the basket as possible at all times, so he can just stop the Clippers in that area. If he's chasing around Blake Griffin from mid-range and all that, then, that's just going to be a thing that's going to be interesting to see, Are they going to use Blake's mid-range jumper to stretch Gobert out? Is Gobert going to defend Griffin at all? I don't really know. Now Blake, I mean, he's a fantastic offensive player, so no matter who you put on him, he's still going to get his points, but I mean, there's definitely some options for the Jazz. As for the shooting guard matchup, I think it's kind of a wash between Redick and Hood. Rodney Hood might be a bit more erratic. I expect Redick to be his consistent 15-point scoring self. Rodney Hood better be ready to run across a million screens because that's Redick's whole game plan. And now let's talk about the center matchup. I mentioned Gobert a moment ago, but we're going to dive into it a bit more. He and DeAndre Jordan is going to be a lot of fun because these guys have very similar games. Offensively, they are in screens frequently where they can then roll to the rim and receive passes from George Hill or Chris Paul or Gordon Hayward or Austin Rivers if he's going to be healthy. In the case of DeAndre Jordan, he's a bit more athletic, so he might catch some more alley-oops. Gobert can get up there as well, but they're both very good when it comes to finishing around the rim. And then defensively, they're two of the best that the NBA has today at the center position. I mean, who's going to be the better rim protector? Who's going to do a better job of defending the pick and rolls and providing the help defense? And I mean, who's going to do a better job against each other? Neither one of them are really post-up players, but they're still guys who contribute offensively around the rim, and I mean, the other guy is going to be defending it, so that's just going to be a very fun matchup to watch those two getting physical with each other, playing defense, moving around the floor, blocking shots, grabbing rebounds against each other. That's just going to be awesome. But now we can talk about the second units. First and foremost, I mentioned Austin Rivers is injured right now. He's been pretty damn good for the Clippers this season. His shooting across the board has stepped up, averaging about 12 points a game. If he's not healthy, that's really going to hurt them because there have been lineups this season with him in the starting lineup that have been actually really good. But now we can talk about the Clippers bench as a whole. They like to use all 5 bench guys. They'll have Austin Rivers, Wesley Johnson, and then Jamal Crawford. All of these guys in the game at the same time. And then they'll have either Brandon Bass or Maurice Spates. These lineups have not been good. They're minuses on the season. And if Doc Rivers uses them against the Jazz, who do a fantastic job when it comes to their rotations, then that's going to be a problem. Because what Utah does is, on all of their most frequent lineups, Gordon Hayward as well as Rudy Gobert are in the game, but they both still only play 34 minutes a game, which I don't know how the hell you manage to do that as a head coach, but that's a damn good job to have those two in the game frequently enough to where it's impactful, but they're not playing 40 minutes. They also then have a nice rotation of they bring in Joe Ingles with the starters and then Joe Johnson comes in next. They have a nice mix of starters with bench players at all times, as opposed to the Clippers, who go through these droughts of no starter on the floor, and as a result, they're minuses on the season in those lineups like I mentioned. So just having quality players at pretty much every position at all times, that's definitely going to be an advantage for the Jazz. And I mean, I've been pretty critical of Doc Rivers in the past when it comes to his ability as a tactician, I guess. I think Quinn Snyder is just a better head coach than he is. And when we get to the playoffs, head coaching really matters when you recognize what a good matchup is and when you should make a substitution. It's those type of things that make the difference, and I would just give Snyder a better chance. I'm also fearful of the Clippers' defense, because it's always around mid-tier in the NBA, and right now it's 15th, where the Jazz have been one of the best in the league. And even with all that, I'm still picking the Clippers to win, for one reason: Chris Paul. These are two teams from a talent perspective. They're not drastically off from one another. There's a reason they're the 4 and the 5 seeds, although the Jazz have had injuries up the wazoo this season. But the Clippers have the best player. They have Chris Paul, who in his last 5 games is averaging 25 and 12. He's been great when he's actually been healthy this season. And also, he's a master at the mid-range. He's a master of teardrops. He shoots less than 1 shot at the basket a game, which means he's not going to be dealing with Rudy Gobert that much. So I think Chris Paul is going to be the difference, and I do think the Clippers are going to win this series. And, I mean, that's my pick.